People living in the life after this life communicate to us through writing. The writing we receive shows the people writing are alive and well in the next life. It is more proof of the simple truth: you will never die. This video contains examples of people living in the life after this life communicating through writing. One method they use to communicate is called automatic writing. In automatic writing, the person in spirit takes over the medium's body and writes. In another version of writing by people in spirit, the person in spirit doesn't use the medium at all. They pick up the pencil or use a bit of chalk on a slate or control the keyboard and do their own writing. The third way people in spirit communicate through writing is to cause the writing to appear on surfaces using no writing tool, called precipitated writing. The fourth way people in spirit communicate to us is through slate writing. And the final way that people in spirit communicate is through automatic typewriter writing. The first method is called automatic writing. In automatic writing, the person in spirit takes over the medium's body and writes. In automatic writing, the writer is entirely unaware of what their hand is writing and has no control over the hand's movements. The writing is often in scribbles, with no breaks between the words. The hand is writing very quickly under the control of the person in spirit. In other instances, the penmanship is very legible and controlled. The writing and signature most often match samples of the person in spirit's writing from their time on Earth. The most studied automatic writing medium was Leonora Piper, who lived in New England until her transition in 1950. While in trance, her control Finuit spoke using her vocal mechanism. Piper would rest her head on a pillow on a table with her face toward the left. Writing material was arranged on the right side, usually 100 blank sheets of paper and 4 or 5 soft lead pencils. After she went into trance, someone would place a sheet of paper in front of her and a pencil in her hand. Piper's hand would write page after page while she was in trance, with someone removing each sheet after it was filled and replacing it with a fresh one. Two personalities were able to control Piper and conduct conversations with individual sitters or groups of sitters while she was in trance. Her control personality in spirit, Finuit, used Piper's voice in a normal way, holding conversations with the sitters. At the same time, other individuals in spirit were using Piper's writing hand to write continuously about unrelated subjects, oblivious to the conversations Finuit was having through Piper. Members of the British Society for Psychical Research invited Piper to stay with them in England so they could observe her mediumistic performance. She was studied by Dr. William James, the father of American psychology, Dr. Richard Hodgson, an English investigator of psychic phenomena, Dr. Oliver Lodge, professor of physics at University College in Liverpool, Dr. James Hislop, professor of ethics and logic at Columbia University, and Frederick W. H. Myers, a British classicist. Piper held regular sittings in England with the 5 researchers for the next 3 months, with Oliver Lodge alone attending 83 sittings. As a result of their experiences, Frederick Myers, Richard Hodgson, and James Hislop each wrote extensive reports, concluding that based on their observations, the speakers through Piper were who they claimed to be, they were very much alive, and they directly communicated with the sitters present when Piper was in trance. In the United States, William James sat with Piper for 18 months, carefully monitoring her and controlling her seance arrangements. James wrote in the 1890 Proceedings of the Society for Psychical Research, "And I repeat again what I said before, that taking everything that I know of Mrs. Piper into account, the result is to make me feel as absolutely certain as I am of any personal fact in the world that she knows things in her trances which she cannot possibly have heard in her waking state, and that the definite philosophy of her trances is yet to be found." The next area of proof people in the next life can communicate to us through writing is direct writing. In direct writing, the writing results from some instrument or action, but without the medium's control. Sir William Crookes, an English chemist and physicist who discovered thallium and invented the radiometer and other devices, recorded his first experience in direct writing with physical medium Kate Fox Jenkin, one of the famous Fox sisters. This is his description of the experience. A luminous hand came down from the upper part of the room, and after hovering near me for a few seconds, took the pencil from my hand, rapidly wrote on a sheet of paper, threw the pencil down, and then rose up over our heads, gradually fading into darkness. Robert Dale Owen, a member of the United States Congress, sat with medium Henry Slade on February 9, 1874. During the sitting, Owen observed a white, feminine, marble-like hand, detached and shaded off at the wrist, creep up Slade's knees onto the table. The hand grasped a pencil, wrote on the notepaper that had been placed on the table, and slipped back with the pencil under the table. 5 minutes later, the performance was repeated by a smaller hand that resembled the first. In seances with another medium, Mrs. Thomas Everett, Sir William Crookes tested the medium's direct writing. Folded sheets in a sealed envelope were marked and inserted into a closed book. The book was placed in a locked box with a pencil in it. When the box was opened and the envelope unsealed, the paper was found to have writing on both sides. No matter how thin the paper was, the pencil produced no indentation. Nevertheless, it was clear that the pencil had been used, since once the words appeared double because the lead had a double edge. Another supernormal phenomenon was the speed with which the scripts were delivered. The next area of proof the people in spirit are alive and well and can communicate through writing is precipitated writing. Precipitated writing appears on a surface with no human hand or writing instrument involved. In 1889, Dr. Paul Gibbier, founder of the Pasteur Institute in New York, set out to study reports that hypnotized subjects were able to project characters and lines of writing on blank sheets of paper. He and 20 witnesses observed a seance in which he witnessed 2 hypnotized subjects sitting apart from carefully observed blank sheets of paper when writing precipitated in full light. The observation was signed by all 20 witnesses. The precipitated writing was a full page of written verses signed Corneo. The Scole Experimental Group was a group of sitters in Scole, Norfolk, England, who engaged in physical mediumship from 1994 to 1998. The group produced a wide range of phenomena and was investigated for 2 years by 3 senior members of the Society for Psychical Research: Montague Keene, author and researcher; Dr. Arthur Ellison, an electrical engineer and president of the Society for Psychical Research; and Dr. David Fontana, a psychologist. Dr. Walter Schnitker, a consultant engineer, and his wife Karen had heard that undeveloped film would have words and images precipitated on it during Scole Group's seances. Dr. Schnitker arranged to test whether such a phenomenon was possible. The Schnitkers brought their own Polaroid 35mm film in a box. Both the Schnitkers checked the room before the rest of the group entered the room. Dr. Schnitker marked the film and placed the unexposed film in a box in the center of a table on a sheet of plain white paper and padlocked the box. Dr. Schnitker drew a line around the perimeter of the box on the underlying paper, showing the exact position of the box and the location of the padlock, which hung down upon the paper. Each group member wore a luminous wristband to ensure all knew the positions of other group members. No one left their seat. Dr. Schnitker held the box in his hands through the entire session. When the session was finished, Dr. Schnitker confirmed that the box was in precisely its original position. The unexposed film was retrieved from the box and touched only by the 2 Schnitkers. Dr. Schnitker checked the marks on the film to ensure there was no substitution. The 2 Schnitkers supervised the developing. What emerged on the film was this dragon image. In the right area of the film was a cross, with something intertwining the cross, possibly a serpent, and a landscape with mountains or trees and clouds. In another area of the film on the left were letters the Scole Group interpreted as standing for the initial letters of the Hebrew names for God. The words in the middle of the strip of film, Quadrans Moralis, refer to a star constellation originated by an astronomer in 1795, who named it for the wall-mounted quadrant he used to plot and observe stars. A triangle and unknown symbol appeared on the right extreme of the strip of film. In another image on the same film, the word or name Casil appeared and an unknown symbol. The reason for its position on the film is not known. The next area of proof people living in the next life can communicate to us through writing is slate writing. In slate writing, those in spirit write on slates without the medium's physical involvement in the writing. The slates were the kind used by school children in the 19th century when paper was in short supply. The slates could be written upon and erased for new usage. The chalk most often wasn't like the school chalk used today. It was soapstone or softer pieces of slate cut into strips to form the familiar shape of a writing instrument. A piece of cloth or sponge was used to clean the slate. The cloth was often attached with a string to the bottom of the writing slate. At times, slate writing was done by having two of these slates bound together with a string or other binding. There was sufficient space between the slates because they had wood frames so that a small crumb of chalk could be inserted. At other times, the slate was placed flat on a table with a crumb of chalk under it, or held against the underside of the table with a piece of chalk against the table. Guests observing would often bring their own slates and observe closely as the slates were bound together with no writing on them. The activity could occur in light or darkness. Often scratching could be heard coming from the slates. When opened, there were messages to the sitters. The first example of research is observation of slate medium Fred Evans from San Francisco. The editor of the Golden Gate newspaper, David L. Holub, and his wife had a session with Evans on May 18, 1887. Evans' psychographic guide was a man in spirit named John Gray. The three sat at a table in full daylight. John Gray signaled his presence by raps on the table. Holub asked Gray whether he could bring together a number of spirits of different earthly nationalities who would write short messages on the slate. Gray communicated that he agreed. Holub inspected the slate and was satisfied that there was no writing or marking on it. From that moment, the slate never left Holub's hands. A small crumb of slate pencil was placed on the table. The Holubs placed the slate over it and rested their hands on it. The medium, sitting on the opposite side of the table, touched the outer edge of the slate frame for a few moments and then removed his hands entirely. In about 5 minutes, a loud rap signaled that the writing was finished. They raised the slate and found the underside covered in writing. The languages on the slate were German, Italian, French, Greek, Spanish, Norwegian, Chinese, Japanese, Hebrew, Egyptian, and Old Asiatic. John Gray had given Holub what he asked for. Another slate medium was P.L.O.A. Keeler at Lilydale, New York, a hamlet whose residents are largely connected to spiritualism. 3 officers of the Lilydale Assembly, the oversight body for medium activities at Lilydale, conducted an investigation of Keeler's mediumship. During the afternoon of Thursday, July 23, 1908, Mrs. Humphrey, President, H.W. Richardson, Vice President, and George Warren, Treasurer, collected 2 slates from the center of a newly opened bundle of slates bought at the general store and placed a special stamp that could not be duplicated on the frames and writing surfaces of the inner side of the slates. The 2 slates were placed on the table with a small crumb of slate chalk beneath each. Each sitter wrote their name on a separate slip of paper, folded it tightly, and placed it on the table beside the slates. No names of friends in spirit were at any time written by the sitters. The slips, slates, and Mr. Keeler's hands were never out of sight of the 3 officers' eyes. At the close of the 1¼ hour's sitting, the slates were turned over. On the 2 slates were 1 message from a brother of Mr. Richardson, 4 messages for Mrs. Humphrey and her immediate family, 2 messages for Dr. Warren, and 1 for an unidentified person. 1 was written in yellow, but the others were from the common slate pencil crumb that was placed between the slates at the beginning of the seance. When folded papers with participants' names on them were opened, words written in green appeared on the paper bearing Dr. Warren's signature. The message read, "It is difficult to get anything on slates not magnetized." The investigators concluded the messages were not written in advance. A substitution of slates was impossible. Mr. Keeler could not have written them during the sitting, for he could not have gained access to the inside surfaces where they were found without immediate detection. Another group of 6 board members conducted an investigation the following day, taking similar precautions, and received 11 messages in Greek, German, French, Swedish, and Japanese or Chinese. Linguists consulted afterwards said the Greek, French, and Swedish messages were grammatically correct. The report was signed by all 6 members of the board who took part in the investigation. In another study, Dr. William Barrett, a physicist and co-founder of the Society for Psychical Research, tested the direct writing done by medium Henry Slade. Dr. Barrett provided a clean slate. He put a crumb of slate pencil on the table and placed the slate over the crumb of pencil. Dr. Barrett held the slate firmly down with his elbow and allowed only the tips of Slade's fingers to touch the slates. He observed the following. While closely watching both of Slade's hands, which did not move perceptibly, I was much astonished to hear scratching going on apparently on the underside of the table, and when the slate was lifted up, I found the side facing the table covered with writing. A similar result was obtained on other days. Another proof people in spirit can communicate to us through writing is independent typewriter typing. In independent typewriter typing, the medium sits with a group of sitters around a typewriter. The entities in spirit manipulating the typewriter cause the keys to strike, typing out messages. A group of researchers, including a Professor Ames, asked medium Lizzie Bangs, one of the famous Bangs sisters, to demonstrate her automatic keyboard actions during the Chicago World's Fair in 1895 for them to observe the phenomenon. 4 sitters and Lizzie Bangs sat in the dark around a table with a typewriter on it. The early typewriters required considerable effort to type, so unseen hands typing on them would have been quite a feat. All joined hands, including Lizzie Bangs, who was behind the typewriter. As the machine began typing on its own, Professor Ames, who was facing the typewriter keys, bent his head down over the machine until his face almost touched the keys, and the keys continued to type. Professor Ames reported that there was no room for a hand, spirit or human, to intervene between his face and the keys. When the first message was finished, the sheet was taken out by those in spirit, put into a box beneath the machine, and a fresh sheet of paper was adjusted into the machine. 5 messages were thus written and put into the box. When the seance was finished, the sitters found in the box a message addressed to each sitter. Professor Ames stated that the typing was more rapid than could be done by any of his secretaries. Another report of Lizzie Bangs' independent typewriting was published in the June 17, 1893 edition of the spiritualist publication Light of Truth by journalist George Lieberknecht. This is Lieberknecht's account. The circle consisted of 6 men and 1 lady besides the medium. We were seated closely around a small table with hands joined. A typewriter was placed on the small table in the center. Before the lights were put out, the door was locked. The medium sat in the circle just like the rest of us, but facing the back, not the front of the typewriter. I feel confident in saying the medium does not touch the typewriter at all. It is used independent of or without contact from the medium's hands or fingers. There is no holding or hesitating in the action of the machine. On the contrary, you hear that it is operated with an astonishing degree of swiftness and dexterity. When one letter or message is finished, the sheet is removed, folded up, addressed on the machine, and the next one is printed until each one of the sitters has one. The one addressed to the writer of this article from his son contains 186 words. In mechanical execution, this independent typewriter, of which I examined several specimens at the close of the seance, is done in a neat, clear, businesslike manner, and although punctilious critics could point out some errors in punctuation, the performance is as good as the letters one receives from first-class business houses. These carefully researched examples of people in the life after this life communicating to people who knew them on this side of life is another of the many validated proofs that there is no death and there are no dead. You will never die.